afternoon, everyone. And now I want to tell you about our wonderful guest speaker for today, Lauran Clarke. Lauran is a native Texan on a mission to make you rethink and reuse. She's on a mission to make you rethink and reuse your urban environment. She's the founder and CEO of Turn, a sustainability company that benefits businesses and households while reducing their environmental impact. Their subscription-based model not only helps the environment, but it rewards those who join them. Lauran studied violin performance at the University of North Texas, strategic communications at Columbia University, and was in the culinary arts program at our own El Centro campus of Dallas College. She has a broad background in marketing and strategy, doing work for large and small companies. She's a certified master gardener with Texas A&M AgriLife and a certified culinarian with the American Culinary Federation. She is supremely grateful for her husband and her 2 children. So, Lauran, thank you for being with us today, and I'm turning it over to you.
Georgianne, thank you so much. Thank you, Dallas College. Thank you, EarthX, for having me today. I'm thrilled to be with you. Let's get going. So today we're going to we're going to talk today about the basics of urban composting in your backyard. If you live in a house, of course, if you're in a condo and an apartment, you can actually do composting there as well. I hope this time will be informative and fun and informational and interactive. You'll see there will be some poll questions that will come through to you in the chat. If you have questions, please submit them in the chat, and Georgianne or Lori can interrupt me, and I will try to answer the best I can. Today, we're going to talk through sort of the basics of composting. What is it? Why is it important? How is it made? How do you know when it's ready? How should it be applied? And also the varying methodologies for composting. What I like to do during this presentation is spend sort of the first part going through some of the sciencey aspects of how composting works. And then I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions about that section. And then we'll move into the nuts and bolts, which are the varying methodologies for composting. All right, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So my goal is to get to the end of this presentation in 40 minutes and then allow for some interactivity. This is me. I started a company doing composting 2 years ago in Dallas. It came about actually because I really love gardening and I really love cooking. And so those were 2 of my core passions. And then I came across this intersection of a problem with food waste. Compost is such an incredibly important part of gardening, as soil health is very important for it. And then us Americans, we love to cook, and we actually have a problem with food waste. So the business that I started came out actually of 2 sort of varying passions, and I came across this intersection of a problem and let's start to do something about it. So all this being said, if you want to ask a question about gardening or cooking, or even engaging your kids in composting, I have 2 kids at home, a 20-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I also have 6 backyard chickens. So there are no sort of topics that are off limit for me during our time today. And I just encourage you to feel comfortable asking whatever questions you'd like to know. All right, so it seems banal, but I'm going to just start with the basic definition. What is compost? And there was a poll question, I think, at some point asking how many have you composted before? All right, I imagine some of you have, maybe some of you haven't. Jasmine wants some chickens. I love it. Here's the poll question. Have you ever composted before? All right. In a nutshell, compost is organic materials that have decomposed to create a stable soil product that feeds plants. Okay, and those organic materials, generally speaking for us in an urban environment, our food waste from our kitchens and yard waste from our yards, okay? And that is the basic definition, and you can see there's some nice finished compost. Why is composting important? On our website, we have a link to lots of sources and reasons. We have sort of a top 10 list, but I always feel like it's important to start with the why of anything. And I don't want to be too long about it, but I think about the why for composting in 3 different dimensions. One, it's incredibly important for our environment. Rotting food waste in our landfill creates methane gas, which is a horrible greenhouse gas. In fact, the UN Environment has said that if food waste were represented as a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of methane gas into our atmosphere behind China and the US. The average US household generates 650 pounds of compostable materials each year. The City of Dallas itself says that approximately 30% of what goes into our landfills is compostable kitchen and yard waste. And you're going to see that 30 to 40% percentage ratio across many different cities and actually many different global numbers. That's generally 30% of what goes into our trash is food. I'm thrilled, by the way, that the City of Dallas has issued and that the City Council approved a climate action plan, and zero waste is one of those pillars for our city. You can read more about that at dallasclimateactionplan.com. So check that out. Okay, so food waste is a problem for our environment. That's the first point. The second point is food waste that goes to the landfill and in our trash is actually a wasted resource because it is a valuable component in creating compost, okay? Compost is an amazing part of our soil that should be there. There's so many benefits to our soil. Compost has a wide spectrum of macro and micronutrients that balance and stabilize the pH. It can improve soil structure, drainage and aeration, and retain moisture. And if you think about, Dallas, Fort Worth, or Texas, and our usually quite dry environments where water is a really precious resource, compost is something that we should all be adding regularly, at least once a year, ideally every growing season, back into your vegetable beds or your growing beds. I do want to delineate here that compost is not fertilizer. Fertilizer is meant to replace missing links in your plant's diet. Think about vitamins, right? Compost has the whole spectrum of nutrients. It's more of I would say, general multivitamin, whereas fertilizers, can replace 1 or 2 or 3 missing links. The third dimension of why the benefit of composting, I like to say, is economic. So, if you're not a believer in the environmental climate change issues, or let's think about your wallet, okay? Us Texans love our perfect green grass, our perfect looking yards, and we're willing to spend a lot of money on yard services, trimming services. If you're regularly applying compost to your urban space, I'd like to make the argument that you're actually going to save money because you're not going to necessarily need as much or hardly ever those fertilizers, those expensive services. You're going to be saving on the cost of your water. You're going to be saving on the cost of your fertilizers. So if you're just a total pragmatist, I would argue with you on an economic standpoint that utilizing compost in your landscape will save you money. So those are some of the whys. All right, I want to pause here and show you this slide. It's issued by the USDA, and it's called the Soil Food Web. And the point of this slide is illustrative, that there is a whole universe beneath our feet. And, culturally and historically in America, we have been fascinated with space exploration. And I'd like to think that we have perhaps underestimated and neglected the exploration of the soil and the universe beneath our feet. Some of the players on this stage can be seen with our eyes, the bugs, the birds, animals, worms. Some of these things are microscopic, the fungi and the bacteria. And so, oh, good to see that poll. All right, awesome. So most of you have already composted. That's great. Check out the Soil Food Web. There's a ton of cool new research being done about microbes and microbial communication. There's so much emphasis right now on our gut bacteria and the health of our guts. The same thing is happening with soil health, and that research is really powerful, understanding how important our soil health is. Healthy soil makes healthy plants, and healthy plants makes healthy food that can make healthy people. So check out the Soil Food Web. And if you have kids at home, it's fun to let them go out in the backyard and play around with these guys. In fact, I have a 5-year-old, and that's part of our adventures outside is, welcoming these creatures. And there was another poll question that I submitted to you all, and that is, are bugs in your compost a good thing? I guess I sort of answered that question, but it comes up a lot when I teach this class is people ask me, okay, I have roaches in here, I have, pill bugs and whatnot, or ants. And so I'd like to know if you guys think that is a good thing or not, based on what I've just told you. Okay, how is compost made? I'm sure most of you like to cook or have cooked at home. So I like to make the analogy of cooking when you think about making compost in the construct of a recipe. There are 4 main ingredients that go into making compost. If you remember anything from this presentation, I would ask you to remember these 4 items. And they are brown things, green things, air, and water. Okay? Brown stuff, green stuff, air, and water. We're going to dive into that a bit more. The brown stuff are carbon sources. Things like leaves, pine needles, dried plants, hay, wood chips, shredded paper are carbon sources. Yes, you all agree that you should have bugs in your compost. I'm so glad. Yes, bugs are our friends. They are nature's decomposers. So thank you for that, responding to that survey. Carbon is probably the biggest, largest quantity of item that you want in your compost, and we're going to talk about that ratio here in a minute. But what I'd like to challenge you to think about is saving your carbon sources if you want to compost at home for use throughout the year. It drives me crazy to see bags of leaves on the curb because during the summertime, you might need those brown leaves for your compost. And in fact, in the summertime, because I've already used all my leaves, I actually use shredded paper from my shredder, cardboard bags, paper bags from Whole Foods or any of your grocery stores are another carbon source. So think about utilizing everything around you as resources, whether it's out in your yard or in your kitchen. All right, the first ingredient, carbon sources, the brown stuff. The second ingredient is the green stuff, all right? That's a nitrogen source. Food scraps are generally represented as nitrogen sources. Grass clippings, fresh living plants. Manure and coffee grinds, even though they're in the brown color, are considered a nitrogen source. On the right-hand side of this picture, you're going to see a bucket of really gorgeous looking food that's probably still edible, but that we compost in the Turn residential composting program. All right, so even if your food is rotting, it can still, it's already decomposing, still go into your compost. So second ingredient, nitrogen sources. I want to talk about food scraps a little bit more because if you're wanting to compost at home, there's a general do's and don'ts list. Take a second to look through the top portion here. Raw fruits and veggie scraps are probably a no-brainer. Eggshells, Beans, nuts, and seeds, coffee grinds, filters, tea bags. I compost breads, grains, pastas, and crackers in my house because I have a 5-year-old. We have a lot of snacks going on, and all that stuff is composted if it's not fed to my chickens. General no's are meats, fish, dairy, bones, liquids, fats, and oils. It goes without saying you don't want to compost your glass, metal, and plastics, okay? The reason why you don't want to do these other items, generally speaking, is just because it can create an unwanted odor and attract unwanted visitors, all right? We're going to talk at the very end of this presentation about a couple ways that you can go completely zero waste in your kitchen and compost these things. But if you want to compost outside using a container or a heap or something that's not covered, you're going to want to really try to generally avoid these things. And same thing for pet waste and litter. Had a lot of questions about that. It's a general no-no, especially if you're using your compost to grow vegetables. Reason being, you know, the vaccinations and the medicines that we give our pets will come out. So general rule of thumb I like to say is if you're making compost for your edible landscape to feed your family, don't put your pet waste in there. All right. So this is a general do's and don'ts. All right. So we talked about the carbon sources, the brown stuff. The green stuff are nitrogen sources. Water is, of course, essential. And whenever you're adding organic materials to your compost, it's a general rule of thumb to go on ahead and just wet that layer. So thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about where to start your compost pile, be sure you have access to water. You want to keep your compost moist like a sponge, but not like a wet towel. This is an actually industry standard from the U.S. Composting Council and commercial facilities. They're at the optimum moisture range is 45 to 60%. You know, we talked about the soil food web and those microbes. And so water is required by those players in the universe for decomposition to start, okay? So you have to keep your compost moist. The fourth final ingredient is oxygen, air. Maintaining a well-oxygenated pile will reduce foul odors. The more you turn your pile, generally speaking, the faster it's going to break down. It will speed up the decomposition rate. And another factor here that's interesting is that the smaller the materials are going into your pile, the faster the decomposition rate will happen. The reason is because you have more surface area on those items. So if you want to make compost faster at home and you have spare time to chop up your broccoli into smaller pieces before you throw it in your pile, that's going to help it produce faster compost. Same thing with the paper. Same thing with your leaves, okay? If you have a leaf shredder and you shred those babies, it's just going to make it start to cook faster. All right. So the fourth ingredient is air. Now, I need to stop here and talk a little bit about the quantity and quality of these 4 ingredients. There is a theory that you need to have a space for all of this matter that's at least 3 feet tall or by 3 feet in diameter. Some people will say 4 feet, but general rule of thumb there and why that is because it's sort of the optimum starting point for mass for the cooking process to start to happen. And we'll talk in a second about different shapes of compost piles and, you know, containers that you can do. Again, every time you add in a layer of something, be sure you can moisten it. If you can mix it up, that's great. That's ideal. Pitchfork, shovel, whatever you have on hand, that will speed up decomposition. This last point is actually really critical, and it's called the carbon to nitrogen ratio. All right, CN ratio. Now remember, the carbon are the brown sources and the green are the nitrogen sources. The ideal ratio for those things to break down and start to the magic and the party to happen is actually 30-1. So you need to have a lot of browns to complement your food scraps. And that's why I tell people, even if you have to be that crazy lady like me that gets my neighbor's bags of leaves and puts them in my side yard, do it. Okay? Because you need a constant supply of carbon to offset that nitrogen. And you'll see on the right-hand side here, if I move my picture, about the optimal temperatures that happen when those ratios are applied. All right. Now, do you need to measure it out, with a cup or whatever of how much you're putting in? No, don't worry about that. I just try to tell people add as much brown material as you can. Okay. I don't go so far as to measure any of the things that I put in my compost pile. I just keep adding the browns whenever I can. All right. A quick comments on temperature. Generally speaking, the hotter the pile, the faster the decomposition. The ideal range is between 140 and 150 degrees. However, if it gets too hot, you can actually kill those good microbes that we saw in the soil food web picture, right? And then the rate of composting will slow. Some of you may want to compost your weeds and flowers and worry about, oh my gosh, are these things going to be popping up all over my yard when I apply the compost? Just be sure you get it hot enough above 130 that those things are going to be nuked. Now you can buy a compost thermometer from a local nursery if you want and keep a log of the temperatures. I don't do that personally, but it is something that you can do if you really want to become scientific about it. Just a quick little story about how hot the piles can get. And at one of our community composting sites, we will harvest twice a year for our customers. And we usually harvest once in late winter, early spring, when it's still cold outside, but the middle of our piles will be hot to the touch. So everybody in our team, even though we're bundled up in jackets and coats and hats, you have to be careful. It's like touching a hot skillet in the oven. I attended national training with the U.S. Composting Council, and the classmate sitting next to me was from Vancouver, British Columbia. And of course, they have sub-zero freezing temperatures up there. And at his facility, their piles were so hot, he said, that even though they were covered in ice, they were cooking inside, and they actually had a fire start inside their piles, even though it had ice and frost on it. So it's a little bit mind-blowing to think about the action and the heat and the activity that's happening inside of the composting process. Okay.
This is Georgianne. I have a question.
Yes.
I have heard of compost piles catching on fire. How common is that, and what do you need to do to avoid that?
That's a great question. And it has to do with the mass of materials. So it happens in commercial facilities because their piles are way too high and they've created too much mass. So it can do with the size of your pile. It can also do with lack of moisture and it not being wet enough. It can also be a factor of not turning it, which can cool it down. If you think about like putting, a can of soup in the microwave and it's way too hot, one of the fastest ways to cool it down is to stir it up, right? So it could be a matter of also not giving it enough oxygen. So those are three general things. I haven't heard of a lot of people that I've talked to that have compost fires at their house, but it certainly can happen. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. All right, so when is it ready? You've done all this hard work, right? How do you know when it's ready? Well, I'm a pragmatist. Even though I've done a lot of training on this, I still use this at home. Use your 5 senses, okay? It should be a dark brown color, much like regular soil. It should smell earthy. Should have a loose, crumbly texture and feel. the mass will have likely shrunk to 1/3 of its original volume. The timeliness of how quickly it all happens is based on the factors of those 4 ingredients that we talked about. Okay. You can also get a lab test as an option, but that's not necessary. If you're never composted before and you want to know what your soil is like in your backyard, you can get a pH test at a local nursery, or you can utilize the Texas A&M Soil Laboratory to get a report, and I highly recommend that. We get our our compost tested with them, and we also use a couple of other industry tests. This picture right here is actually our finished compost with Turn, and it came from all the leaves and the food waste and stuff that you saw earlier. And we've had great test results with it using very rudimentary methods, which we're going to talk about in a second. So when is it ready? Best recommendation is use your 5 senses. And if you're worried about it after that, then you can try to troubleshoot and see what you think is going wrong. How can you use compost in your yard?
Lauren, we have a quick question.
Yes.
Before you move on, Jasmine was wondering, she says she usually forgets to turn her compost, so she buys red wigglers to do the work. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, if you want to add, and we'll talk about vermicomposting in a second, but that's a great way to let these wonderful creatures do the mixing for you. If you want to inoculate your pile with red wigglers, that will be fine. We didn't really talk about inoculation, but some people will say, oh, you need to have a starter to get your compost cooking. You can buy those things at a nursery. You can buy molasses, which is sometimes used as an inoculation tool. However, all of that's not necessary. To get your pile cooking, you have those 4 main ingredients. And if you just add a little bit of finished compost to your pile, that's going to get it cooking. But great question about the red wigglers. I mean, those guys are wonderful. And there's several different types of composting worms. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Thank you, Jasmine, for that question. Okay, so where can you use compost? I flip that question on its head and say, where can you not use compost? Because there's literally nothing that it can't be applied to in your urban space. Use it as mulch, use it as seed cover, top dressing. Add a little bit to your plants that are hurting, some of your shrubs. You can apply compost on your turf, on your sod, and that's wonderful. I do that regularly because I always have problem spots throughout the growing seasons. Just be careful when you're doing that, that it's a very thin layer of compost. You don't do it when the temperatures are too extreme, too cold, or too hot. And then the other thing is, if you have a pair of soccer cleats or a pitchfork, you're going to want to try to aerate that turf, your grass, before applying the compost to avoid thatching, to basically just avoid a lot of like tangled hair effect with your grass. So you can use compost everywhere, even on your houseplants. All right, so I'm going to pause right here because we kind of got done with the science-y portion of how composting works and how it's made. Does anyone have any questions about anything I just referred to before we dive into methodologies?
Erica was asking, in what instance would you recommend a lab test?
That's a good question. I really try to delineate the importance of the quality of my compost based on its usage. So I love gardening. My backyard is edible gardening. I feed my family with the plants that we grow. So if I were to be really concerned about what's in there and are there any negative materials, that's probably when I would do it. If it's an ornamental plant, hydrangeas, something like that, that's not super expensive, I wouldn't worry about a lab test. If you're applying compost and you see your plants start to suffer, then there might be something wrong in there. So that's another possible scenario where you might want to get it tested. You know, commercially speaking, they test compost at major facilities for the presence of pathogens and then the presence of fecal matter, which sounds bizarre, but you know, if you're using manure from a farm where they have fertilizers and the horses are eating the fertilized grass and that their manure is used to make the compost, that could be a problem. So those are some sort of scenarios when you might want to think about using a test. Was there another question? I thought I saw one pop up, but
Nope, that was the last question I had.
okay. All right, so the next part is definitely going to get more and more interesting. I like to start with the most boring ways and methods to do composting at home and end with the grand finale of probably the most fringy, disgusting ways. So, okay, here we go. Ways to compost. This may seem so obvious, but I actually learned this in my training with Texas A&M. There's this idea of walkway composting, and that is literally putting those leaves, putting those branches in parts of your urban space where you often walk. And the process of you walking on them is going to help them start to decompose. And then by the end of that season, after you've had some rain and snow, that organic matter is going to be beautifully sort of decomposed so that it's ready to put back in your garden. I have an area that I walk in my side yard and it has a couple of trees, and I just scoop the leaves in the middle, and again, I just keep walking through it, and then I use that to put back in some of my front yard bed every year. So obvious method here, walkway composting. Think about the forest, okay? The forest is floor. You don't see the National Park Service importing compost to the forest, okay? Nature is meant to do these things on its own. So think about that and think about your urban space and letting these things break down naturally. Sheet composting. Okay, so this is a very simple method, and the idea here is whenever you have cut your grass and you have an extra bit of it, or you are raking a couple of bags of leaves, just add those items back into your garden or landscaping beds. You are just adding another organic matter to your soil that's going to break down and attract those microbes and those good guys in the soil food web. This is sometimes called the lasagna method of composting. If you think about the different layers of lasagna, this is a picture of one of the vegetable beds in my backyard. You'll see some leaves in there. We pruned the peach trees. I think there's a dead flower arrangement back on the bottom. Okay, so I literally put all this stuff in here in the winter, and then I cover it with some soil and compost in the springtime, and it just adds another beautiful layer. And here's what it looks like, you know, during one of the growing seasons. And so for me, like, I don't really care what it looks like during the winter, what people think about it aesthetically, because I know that I'm adding the good stuff back to the soil. All right, so that is called sheet composting. This is another old school method. And it is literally digging a hole and burying your scraps. And it's called a compost pocket. The idea here is that, again, you're just adding another organic infusion of materials to the soil of whatever you're growing. I've done this at home because I don't tell anybody anything that I haven't tried myself personally. And actually, I do this regularly because I have fruit trees in my backyard. So sometimes I'll dig a hole and just do a little compost pocket between the trees because they produce a lot of fruit. I will say, please be careful to dig the hole deep enough to not attract other animals or rodents. We have a really lovely, frisky Cocker Spaniel who, when I did not bury it deep enough once, found it right away, and it was a big hot mess. So please be sure if you're going to do a compost pocket that you bury the scraps deep enough. All right. Heap method is probably the classic method that you've heard about your grandmother using. There's two different ways you can do this. One is the slow way, and the other way is the fast way. So the left-hand side here is a heap or a pile. This is at one of our community composting sites. And we've got, you can see little bits of eggshells and green stuff, and we've got mulch and grass. That's a static method. And if we just turn that occasionally, which we turn it once a week at least, you will have finished compost in about 6 months. If you want compost faster, there's this method called the windrow method. And that is what commercial composting facilities use. And there's windrow machines that basically are constantly turning these heaps of compost. And that, of course, helps it to break down faster. And that can be creating finished compost in about 3 months. I want to be sure I didn't miss something, and I don't think I did. All right, so heap method. You've got the slow method and you've got the fast method. This is probably the most common thing that you'll want to think about in your yard is having some sort of container. For those of you who live in a house, there's so many different ways that you can get creative to have a compost pile. The first two images are landscaping wire and fencing. That's me doing a glamour shot next to my pile at US Compost Council training. They split us up into groups and we had a competition over the course of a week with different recipes to see who could make the hottest pile the fastest over the week. You can, if you're big into upcycling, use some pallets, deconstruct those babies and build your own square, your pile. You're gonna see on the right-hand side a thing called a tumbler, which is really heavily promoted in landscaping stores. This is the one in my backyard, actually. I'm not a huge fan of this method as a composting way, just because I don't know how much oxygen is getting in there, moisture. I can't see it. So I prefer actually the more old school method. But compost tumbler, if you're really worried about animals, rodents, whatever, getting to your pile, this is totally a valid way to compost at home. Okay, I like to show you this picture. This is another container method. This is a square one. It's called a shepherd's bin. I think I paid $40 for it. What I like about this, and you can see there's pine needles and stuff, is each of the corners, you can pull up a stake and basically take off one of those sides and dig out the finished compost from underneath it and use it, and then mix it up a little bit. This is probably my absolute favorite container to use. And it's funny because this year I had the most amazing acorn squash that grew out of it, and I had 6 acorns. And of course we ate all of them and they were amazing. I've never been able to successfully grow acorn squash in my garden, but it was a gift from the compost gods, and there's another added benefit. And yes, it's okay to eat food that's grown from your compost. This is another picture of a one of the compost piles in my side yard, and this is a chicken wire cylindrical container. It was $5 from Ace Hardware and some wire cutters, and then I just clipped the ends and hooked them, and I keep adding extra leaves and extra things that come from my side yard or from the chicken coop. And it just keeps sinking down. It just keeps decomposing. What's pretty cool about this is, to the question of a lady earlier about worms, a couple weeks ago, I kind of scraped the top of it, and there are worms and bugs at the very top of this container, which is pretty cool. They basically have traveled from underground and are just having like a little fiesta party inside of this cylindrical compost method. So you don't have to be expensive or do anything crazy complicated to do composting at home. You can use very simple techniques and very inexpensive materials to get the job done. All right. Compost is a worm buffet. Yes, it is, Jasmine. I love talking about oogle culture. It is in a very basic way utilizing decaying wood to create a growing space and to create compost. This is sort of a centuries old technique. It's used in all parts of the world, especially where water is a major resource issue. And the concept here is to try to start with the bigger pieces of wood, down limbs from a storm, and then layer them with the smaller pieces on top, cover it with bushes and twigs, leaves and grass, compost and soil. You can actually create a vegetable growing space with this way. And you'll see that picture in the center is some vegetable growing beds. The right-hand side is my own oogle bed and the starting of one. I used Christmas trees. I used lots of wood after a storm, leaves. Now it's gorgeous. It has blackberries and asparagus and herbs and lettuces growing all over it. And I need to update this to include that picture. But think about all the downed wood that we have after our big Dallas storms. Why don't you get creative and try to do something with that? The decaying wood releases moisture and nutrients over time. So that's the power of what happens with oogle culture. And the literal translation of that is the pathway of the forest. Okay, I told you we're going to get more and more disgusting as we went on the continuum here. Worms are a great way to compost, and that methodology is called vermicomposting. This is so great for those of you who might be in an apartment or a condo where space is limited. Now, be sure you get the right worms, okay? Red wiggler worms are probably the most commonly utilized composting worms. You can order them on Amazon and get them like in one day if you live in Dallas on Amazon Prime, okay? You can also purchase them from a wonderful local organization called Texas Worm Ranch. And Heather Rinaldi is a pioneer in vermicomposting across the United States. She has an amazing organization. If you're interested in learning more about vermicomposting, I would highly recommend taking one of her classes. The idea here is that the worms eat your food scraps, and their castings or their excrement creates a valuable soil amendment called worm castings. You can do it very basic with a Rubbermaid container. Drill some holes in the side, get some shredded paper, moist shredded paper, get your red wigglers in there.
Okay. One of the questions was, how do you turn a chicken wire bin? Well, what really helps is if you have a bin that you can lift up off of your compost pile and set it next to it. So, and then you turn the compost into the newly empty bin, and it's really a two-person job. You need somebody to turn it and shake apart the materials so that you're adding the air in, and then you have to have somebody else adding the water. So yeah, if you store compost in the winter for a garden in the summer, will it dry out? It shouldn't dry out as long as you put it into an airtight container. You'll need to sift it though. So, because what you end up with when you're finished composting is really mulch. So if you want the compost like what you buy in a bag in a store, you're going to have to filter that out. You could do something as simple as getting an old screen, like a window screen, and putting it over top of a wheelbarrow or a container and just sifting the smallest portions out. So, and then if you put that into an airtight container, it should be fine. You might want to add a couple of air holes just to keep any kind of anaerobic thing happening with it. But yeah, it should be fine. And compost is, it's not a fertilizer. It is a soil amendment. So no, fertilizer is not needed unless you use an organic fertilizer. But using organic compost really absolves you of ever having to use the nasty chemicals fertilizers. That kind of, it kills off all the bugs when you add the poisonous fertilizers with all the chemicals in it. So you don't want to do that. You want to do strictly organic. Fire all of your guys who come by and spray the chemicals and put the little sign in your yard. You want to just go completely organic because you want all of those beneficial bugs in your soil. That creates great soil health. And then just adding the soil amendment of the compost with it really strengthens your soil. And the more bugs you find in your soil, especially worms, you know that you have really, really healthy soil. There any other? I think we're still waiting on Lauren to reconnect. So yes, compost is a worm buffet, absolutely. So I think that that Lauren was just getting ready to talk about vermicomposting, which is the composting using your food scraps in a bin of worms, which is not for everybody. I get that, but they are the best roommates you could ever want to have in your house or house guests because they don't party, they don't make noise. As long as you don't put anything in there that's weird, it's not going to smell bad, and you're going to have really excellent compost that you don't need to sift, that you can actually use immediately after you harvest it. So vermicomposting is incredible. It is like gold. And the great thing about it, so there's a good and a bad. A great thing is it's so high in nitrogen that you don't need to use very much for your house, to dress your house plants or to add. The bad thing is that it's so high in nitrogen that it will burn the stalk of any green things that you're putting it around. So make sure you use it in small quantities and that you don't let it touch the stalk of your plants because it will burn your plants because it is so extraordinarily high in nitrogen. So Lacey asks, when you're using paper, is the ink a problem? No, absolutely not. What you do want to do, though, is shred your paper. If you take a newspaper, for those of us who still take a newspaper, you can't just throw it in your compost bin. The trick is to make the pieces as small as possible, and that speeds up the composting uh, sequence. So the more area that you have, the smaller the bits, the faster the microbes can decompose those materials. So no, the ink is not a problem at all, but you really just need to shred that paper. When is it too late to start considering the upcoming cool weather? I don't understand the question. You can compost at any time. It does not, the weather does not matter. The sunshine does not matter. You can compost at any time at all. And Lauren had talked about, that compost piles covered with ice will still give off heat. And that is absolutely true. I have had compost piles in my backyard that just a couple of days after initially building it, I knew it was working because it was December. We had a cold snap and it was like 28 degrees. And I walked outside and there was steam coming off of my compost pile. So that really doesn't have any bearing on the situation. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? We have about 5 minutes left. So we're just gonna keep this going. Any other questions or chats? Yeah, Nancy, absolutely. Carbon, nitrogen, water, and air. You got it. Let's see. I don't see anything else. Brown stuff, green stuff, air, and water. Yes, you've got to have the nitrogen and the carbon. Absolutely. So back to the worm bin. What you want to use is you want to use the pre-consumer scraps. You don't want to put anything in there that's from a dinner plate because of the contamination issue. So the rule of thumb is there are 5 things you cannot put into your worm bin. Foods, you cannot put meat, bones, oils, sauces, or dairy. So just start out with a bunch of shredded paper that's moist, not soaking wet, but just moist, damp. Add your food scraps. Oh, add your worms first. Put the bedding over top of them. Pull back your bedding, add your food, put the bedding back over it, and the worms just do the rest. They will absolutely devour everything that you put in there. When it comes to harvesting the material, I've read several books and tried many methods on how to do that. It is not easy. So I always take the easy way out when it comes to harvesting worm castings. And I just take everything. I take out half of the materials, and if the worms are in it, that's fine because the worms will do great in your lawn. So you just add all of those materials anywhere you need to in your yard, and those the red wigglers will do fine. It doesn't work the other way around with earthworms because earthworms eat dirt. They don't eat organic material, but the red wigglers will eat the organic material in your soil. So, is there a specific order, Mina, Minu, a specific order for what? For layering the bin, or you always do it in layers? You always start with carbon on the bottom? But here's the funny thing, we always say that, and that's what I've been taught in all of my classes. But as you're adding stuff in the bin and you're mixing up everything to add the air and the water, everything gets mixed up anyway. So, yes, the standard answer is always start with carbon on the bottom and layer it, but all your layers are going to get all mixed up. Oh, but I do want to mention one thing. So, if you don't have a nitrogen source, I'm kind of adverse to putting food scraps in my compost pile outside simply because of the things that can go wrong with it. You can use cottonseed meal. So you can go to a feed store, get a 50-pound bag, and use a 3 small coffee cans worth of cottonseed meal for every layer of nitrogen. So if you do that, because it has no mass, you'll need twice as much carbon, but it will still heat up and increase. So I'm so sorry that we lost Lauran, but thank you for sticking around. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. We will be making this available. And so yes, Minu, so you were asking about layering the bin. Yes. So it's carbon, nitrogen, but they're all going to get mixed up anyway. So thank you guys very much. There she is.
There she is.
Fabulous. Yay.
Yay. So if you will unmute yourself, and if you will go ahead and I know that we only have 1 minute left, but I really want you to quickly be able to tell people about your services. And
Sure.
as you know, Lori has a tremendous composting knowledge, and so she has been filling in while we've been trying to get you back on. So thank you for your perseverance.
I'm so sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what happened, but thank you for being here today. Please be in touch with us at turncompost.com if you'd like more information on composting. We actually do classes all the time, very similar to this, and so we'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for your hospitality, Georgianne, Dallas College, and EarthX.
Okay. And also be sure and let them know that you will send them your PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, if you want my PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to send my email. It's lauren@compost.com, lauren@turncompost.com.
Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.